Another feature is the ability to deploy what some people call thick reports. And we can actually demonstrate that in the exact same project. So what I've got here is Contoso sales, which is basically a Power BI desktop data set that, well, as all Power BI desktop data sets also have a report associated with them, right? So we can see there are actually 6 report pages in here. And before this release, the dataset deployment mode would completely have discarded the report and would basically only have worried about the model and would have sent the model over to an XML endpoint and then done a refresh and all of that. What's now new, and it's incredibly simple to enable, is that when your sources happen to have an embedded report, you can actually deploy the report alongside your data set. And what's happening is that the report will be converted to a thin report automatically. So this is also something which, where you're getting some magic for pbi-tools. Lots of people, in the wild struggle with splitting thick reports into separate model and thin reports. So this is precisely what is now happening. I've got my sources from a single pbix-file containing report and model, as we can see. But the deployment will split them. We'll deploy the dataset first, because obviously we need to have the dataset reference, and it will then generate a live dataset connection, inject that into the report sources, and deploy the report as a thin report only. And that is enabled with a single line, which is that one here. So under options and dataset, if you set deploy embedded report to true, it will do that for you fully automatically. And with no other settings, it will basically take the name from the project and will use that as the report name, and it will take the workspace from the data set and will put the report into the same workspace. However, that can be configured. So let me just show what that looks like. Development, we have datasets dev as our workspace, and then we've got Contoso sales dev as our dataset display name. That means the report will go exactly there as well. So if I run this again, there we go. So I'm not specifying an environment here. In that case, it always defaults to development. Development is a default environment. That's the one you don't have to specify explicitly. So, okay, basically this is where the model deployment is completed. We then get some Power BI dataset details, the ID and who owns the dataset and all of that. And now, immediately afterwards, the embedded report deployment actually kicks off. And it basically does pbi-tools compile, but what's different is that it's now basically generating behind the scenes a connections file, which has a connection to that exact same data set. And we can see it then gets imported as Contoso sales dev. And if I go into that workspace, data sets dev, here we go. We can see it's that one, because this one actually has a slightly different name. And if I look into lineage view, I can see this data set. This report is linked to that data set, and opening it up, we can see, sorry, like so. We can see that this is actually what's come from my local machine just now, because obviously my machine doesn't have any GitHub environment variables, which is why we didn't actually get those variables injected here, right? So this is how we can tell very nicely. Plus, obviously, this is the time from just now. So yeah, that's also new, and it helps where you have self-contained projects, you know, where it's literally report and data set and not much else. We do have a few of those at work as well, and I think that's probably quite common. And it also helps where, again, something we do quite a lot, where you actually use the embedded report just for development purposes, so that basically your developers share that embedded report internally in order to test and demonstrate any model changes right there. So that's then not meant to be used and distributed to any users, but it's still very useful maintaining that report. And in that case, I would not deploy it into production, but I would deploy it into the dev environment. And achieving that is also in the box already. So basically with this setting, if I were to put that down here, and if I set skip true and skip true here, what that means is for the embedded report, it's going to be skipped for those two environments. It's not going to be deployed. It will only get deployed into development. Yeah, so that's new. And then thirdly, and again, we can actually stay here. There was quite a lot of change with respect to parameters. And in fact, we can see two of those changes here. So first of all, you can now set a parameter to null. Previously, only string values were supported, which was quite restrictive. And secondly, you can actually refer to internal parameters inside your explicitly declared parameters. So those two parameter labels, environment and pbi-tools version, they are generated as part of the pbi-tools process. They are not environment variables. You know, they don't sit on my machine, nor would they be defined in my CI/CD host. So that's new. And as you can see, there's a slightly different syntax. So for environment variables, we're using percentage signs, and for referencing other parameters, we're using double curly braces. And yeah, so the biggest change here is not very well visible, though, because not only can you specify null, you can actually specify any Power Query supported type. So if we're looking into our queries here, we have a date type parameter. That's a pattern I use quite frequently in order to take advantage of query folding, where in development environments we're putting additional filters into the data set, so that for developer, a full data refresh is actually much faster than a production data refresh. That means the date filter itself will basically be in our sources. That will sit in the repository, so that anyone cloning the repo and compiling that into a new file will basically get those parameters like that. But obviously for production deployment, we need to reset that, right? And so the Power Query syntax for that would be to actually put the null keyword in here. Previously, that wouldn't have been possible because previously pbi-tools would always have emitted a string enclosed in double quotes. So now that's possible. But what's also possible, so if I go back here, I could actually use a Power Query expression like this. And if I put that here, and I don't know, maybe set this to 2007, because that expression starts with a hash character, it's automatically recognized as an expression rather than a string, and the replacement will then put it in here verbatim without actually enclosing it in quotes. So, and the same applies to Booleans and numbers. So strings, nulls, dates, timestamps, date times, Booleans, numbers, they can all be used in parameters and can basically be injected at deployment time. The one significant change which I haven't deployed yet or haven't got in a release yet, but it's coming very soon, is to the ability to define parameters within specific environments, because that's actually what you need in in the real world. In production or UAT or development, you oftentimes want to set parameters differently. For instance, connecting to a different SQL server or actually using different filter expressions. That's not currently possible, but it's coming very soon. If anything, because I heavily need it.